Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Sheviis, chapter 3, Halacha 6. Now, we're going to get into a serious topic. Now, if you have some stones and you opened up a quarry and you had to build a house, and perhaps you were a businessman and you had a quarry and that was your livelihood, you sold stones in some of the rocky hills in Jerusalem or the Judean hills, which there's a lot of very, very rocky hills. A lot of the rock is bedrock. A lot of the rock is made up of giant boulders. And that's your business. You go and you sell stone, you cut the stone, and you sell it to go for other people to go make masonry work. Well, why should this is your field, right? But you're not using it for planting. This is your parnassah. Why should the Sheviis year, which is dealing with agriculture and planting, impede your ability to do things regarding construction, to do things regarding taking out these valuable stones that are very watertight, they're not porous, and people even today will still cover the houses with this stone because it's so waterproofed. And in fact, in Jerusalem, the law is that every building has to have Jerusalem stone covering it. So it keeps a certain look, but this was the masonry that was used in the time. And when you go to the Kotel, you see it. The whole wall is this material. But what happens when you're going to take these stones and you're going to do it with structures that's going to deal with bodies of water? Now, you can do things where you're going to line thoroughfares for water to flow through, and then it's going to look like you're preparing a field. And so then you're going to have other sorts of issues. Now, you can take stones from, in certain circumstances, as we were covering, you can even take stones from your field and use it for building a house. Again, it has to be done in a very special way so it doesn't look like planting. But what happens if you're doing things regarding building and bodies of water? And that's what Halacha 6 is going to cover. So it's going to talk about the construction of steps first, and the Mishnah says one may not build steps leading to ravines. Now, the Rosh is saying that a ravine is going to be trapped rainwater, and the landowner is going to use that trapped rainwater to try to water the crops. So in order to bring this water in safely, it would be necessary to build steps, and that would lead up to the side of this ravine. So this now, you're taking these stones and you're doing it to enable access to water. Well, that's going to be a problem because you didn't have access to this water before. It was harder to do. Now it looks like you're making very easy access to get to this water, and it looks like you'll be able to water a field. And perhaps you can build a stone staircase in a couple of weeks or a week or so. And you could do that theoretically on the 7th year. And now it looks like you're going to be able to water your field, do it on the 7th year, which you're not allowed to do. So this is going to come up with a sort of halacha, which is like enabling something that's going to be able to break a halacha. This is going to be somewhat like, you have somebody who's a known Sheviis merchant, and you have all sorts of baking tools, and it's known. It's not suspect. It's known this person breaks Sheviis. And now you're going to go and you're going to give him baking tools. And that's going to be a problem because now he's taking this, these baking tools, and you're helping him to be able to market his Sheviis produce and sell it. So maybe this guy doesn't want to sell just kernels of grain. Maybe he wants to take his grain and turn it into flour and bread. And you're basically giving him the molds to make bread and all the baking tools. Well, this is kind of the same thing. You're basically enabling somebody to break it. And so, yeah, I mean, building in itself is not a problem, but now you're building something in a way that's going to make it very easy to go and break Sheviis. And that's what the issue here is going to be. So it says, the Mishnah says, one may not build steps leading to ravines during the year before Sheviis once the rains have stopped, because he is preparing them for the Sheviis year. Now, the rains generally will stop sometime around Pesach time, and that is also going to be sometime around when you can stop. You have to stop watering a white field, and the idea here is that you have landowners and they'll build steps into these ravines, and it'll be after the rain ends, and all this ravine and pit will basically be filled up, and basically you only have, I don't know, maybe 5 months to go until Rosh Hashanah. So this would be able to, these steps would be enable you to, water the crops, after Rosh Hashanah. Or alternatively, you've set things up so that during the Sheviis itself, when it's rained, you can water even after this Pesach time. So the Chazan Ish is saying that this act falls within the scope of a pre-Sheviis prohibition against plowing for the sake of a seventh-year crop. And according to this reason, says the Chazan Ish, that the ruling of this Mishnah does not apply nowadays, since Rabban Gamliel and his court nullified the pre-Sheviis prohibition. And the other idea about this is that building these steps will generate suspicion that he's intending to water the crops in violation of the laws of Sheviis, and that's why it's going to be forbidden. So even today, you're going to get a Maris Ein problem where you're going to have an appearance of wrongdoing. Now, this is going to come up in the Gemara. Is this going to be because of a Maris Ein issue, or is this going to be because you're getting ready to prepare for the sake of a seventh-year crop, and this is going to be akin to plowing a field before, so that you can get the ground nice and ready for planting in the seventh year, and that you're basically getting things ready to plant during the Sheviis year. Now, the Mishnah is going to continue. It's going to say, but he may build steps during Sheviis once the rains have stopped, because he is preparing them for the year following Sheviis. So the idea here is that since they are being built for the Sheviis year, says the Rosh Cirilio, the act of building these steps is not classified as a toldal plowing, and it does not give rise to suspicion of wrongdoing. Now, that's going to be questioned because, one could try to still get value out of this pit of rainwater during the Sheviis year itself. So there's a novelty that the Chazan Ish brings up about this, and he's saying that these steps are not meant to walk on and not meant to plant on. They're really just to facilitate planting only indirectly, because it's going to make it easier to bring water to the field. That's going to be the idea. So the Chazan Ish, in his Beur in 27.5, is ruling that constructing these steps is not a toldal of plowing. By the way, this issue is going to come up in the Mishnah, and this is trying to have this conclusion that, which is going to be like what the Gemara is going to be coming up with. Hey, is this going to be plowing, or is this going to be a Maris Ein problem? So the issue is being set here in this Mishnah, and the Gemara is going to try to figure out and sort out which is the reason why these steps are going to be problematic. So the Mishnah is going to finish up, and it's going to say the Mishnah is going to discuss, now we're going to discuss dams, and dams can be used to contain water and to make it so that you have ready access water in a pit or an indentation in the land so you can water a field. I live next to the Jerusalem forest, and if you look down at the town of Bet Zait, you will see that in the winter there's a lake, and the lake, in fact, does have a dam there. And just above the lake are all sorts of vineyards and vines and things like that. And in the ancient world, it would be possible in this indentation to come and to dam it up and then to take the water and then use it for a very long period of time. I mean, you could theoretically water this thing almost up until the next rains came, and it would be at a very low level, but I think a lot of the rainwater from the year before would still be there, and so that you would have the ability in the summer to take your vineyard and keep it watered. So the idea about the dam is as follows in this mission. It says he may not support a dam with dirt, but he may make it a loose partition. So the idea is he can't make a cement dam, and he can't take dirt and mortar on Sheviis to do it. And the idea is if he's doing that, he's basically going to be suggesting to everybody that he's intending to use the water right away in that year. And so it's forbidden to cement the dam. This is again talking about Sheviis, and perhaps just before Sheviis in the 6th year, because specifically, even after, the rains of the Sheviis year have stopped, because people are going to suspect him of basically violating the law against watering crops on Sheviis. Now, what about this partition? So the idea here is that comes from the Rosh and his explanation in the Mishnah, and it's saying that it refers to walls designed to prevent trespassers from taking water, and the Mishnah does not give any indication that it's not discussing the previous case of building steps. So there's going to be, an idea that, really this is going to be where these are special walls that are going to be to stop people from taking the water out of this. And so then that's the idea about a loose partition. So you can't build these walls to stop people from taking water, says the Rosh, because in effect it's looking like you're wanting the water. And why are you wanting the water? Because you could come and water your own field. So you wouldn't want to create these walls to stop other people from taking it. Now, there's going to be a law regarding stones that could be taken from the field while the construction is in process. And the Mishnah continues, says, any stone that one can stretch out his hand and take may be taken. Now, I want to talk about this with the commentary by the Marafulda. So he's saying that a person who is building these structures like steps or an uncemented dam during Sheviis is permitted to take any stone from the field, even a small one, and use it for the construction as long as it's within his arm's reach. Now, it's ordinarily forbidden to remove small stones during a field during Sheviis, since he might be suspected of clearing the field for planting. But when you're in the middle of a construction project and you're only taking those stones he can reach from the construction site by stretching out a hand, it's obvious that these stones are being used in the construction and it's not being used to clear his field. I mean, in other words, people are walking by, they're seeing you build this construction project, and if they see you taking stones, they see you're not taking it to go and get, clear up your field. They see that you're taking it because you need to finish your project. So that is clear on the intention. There's certainly not a Marasayan issue there, because you know where the stones are going. You know why he's taking these stones. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about the first ruling of the Mishnah, and that's about, the rain, and when the rain stops in the 6th year and you're making these steps. So Rabbi Crispa says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, who reported in the name of Hanina ben Gamliel, that the Mishnah is referring to the time when the prohibition against planting the 2 Sheviis periods was in effect. But today, when you have this prohibition, it's not in effect, and one can build the steps leading to ravines at any time before the actual start of Sheviis. Now, This is going to be because Rabbi Crispa is basically holding that building steps that you are going to be used to get access to this water, it's going to be a tolda of plowing. And he's basically going to be understanding the Mishnah as forbidding this construction because it's going to be like the tolda of plowing. And, you're not allowed to do plowing in advance of Sheviis, and that's going to also apply to the building of these steps. And it's not going to be because of the competing explanation that's going to be coming up, which, by the way, the Chazan Ish holds by, which is going to be that it's a Maris Ayin problem. Now, this prohibition against plowing was annulled by Rabban Gamliel in his court, and it became permissible to build these steps. But the question is, why exactly, was there a prohibition on these steps? Is it going to be because it's going to be a plowing issue, and when you take away the plowing issue before Sheviis, you take away the prohibition on these steps as well? Or is it going to be a Maris Ayin issue, and this is sort of no longer relevant? So the Gemara is going to try to prove this from a brisa, and this again is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, and he's basically of the opinion that this is going to be like a tolda of plowing. And once you've taken away Rabban Gamliel's, once Rabban Gamliel takes away this restriction that was set up by Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai together, that you've allowed basically people to come and build these steps in the 6th year to get access to water. Now, the Gemara is going to try to prove this, and it was taught in a brisa. Rabbi Yudah and Rabbi Nehemiah forbid one to build steps leading to ravines before the rains of the 6th year stop. And the Gemara is going to continue to say, is this brisa not referring to when the prohibition against plowing in the 2 pre-Sheviis periods was in effect? Surely it is. The idea, says the Vilna Goan, is that if the pre-Sheviis prohibition against plowing is not in effect, then certainly these Tanaim would not be forbidding construction before the rains stop. And that's a very, very good observation by the Vilna Goan about what these Tanaim are saying. So the Gemara is going to continue with that. And it's going to say, so here, when the Mishnah is disagreeing with these Tanaim and ruling that it is forbidden to build these steps only after the rains of the 6th year stop, the Mishnah is also referring to when the prohibition against plowing in the 2 pre-Sheviis periods was in effect. In other words, says the Vilna Goan, is that the prohibition is not in effect, and it is permitted to build these steps throughout the 6th year. And the Gemara is going to continue, and there's an Amarah who comes and challenges the assumption that this brisa is referring to this era. And Rabbi Shammai, this is not Bet Shammai or the Shammai, or this is not the Shammai, but Rabbi Shammai comes up a couple of times in the Yerushalmi Shas. This is one of them. He's an Amarah. And Rabbi Shammai asks and says, if the brisa is indeed referring to when the prohibition of the 2 pre-Sheviis periods was in effect, this, by the way, keep in mind, is from Halacha chapter 1 and chapter 2. And in chapter 1, we're talking about orchards and fields of trees, and the prohibition on that for a field of trees that's kosher is going to be up until Shavuot. And the prohibition of this other time, the second time for chapter 2, which is going to be fields of grain, is going to be up until the end of Pesach. So we know that this prohibition was removed by the court of Rabban Gamliel. Rabbi Shammai is asking, saying, if this brisa is referring to the prohibition of the 2 pre-Sheviis periods, and that was in effect, about this era, says the Gemara, we would learn in the continuation of the brisa that throughout the 6th year it is permitted to plow, but forbidden to build steps. And that's basically the question that he's saying. Certainly not. In other words, that he's pointing out that in this era, it was also forbidden to plow for part of the 6th year. And we're also seeing that it was also forbidden to build these steps for part of the 6th year. And Rabbi Shammai is basically going to conclude, and he's going to say in this Gemara, rather, the Brisa is referring to an era in which it is permitted to plow during the 2 pre-Sheviis periods, and is teaching that the construction of the steps in the 6th year is forbidden even in this era. In other words, he's saying, says the Mara Fulda, that according to this argument, the construction of the steps leading to this ravine with water is forbidden because it's going to generate suspicion that you're intending to violate the law of Sheviis. And it's even going to be forbidden when you have the pre-Sheviis prohibition against plowing, and that's not going to be in effect anymore. So what they're saying, says Rabbi Shammai, this Amorah, is that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nehemiah are basically saying that people would suspect even someone who's constructing steps during the rainy season of intending to use these steps to water crops during Sheviis. And the Mishnah is holding that they would suspect only the one who constructs them after the rains stop. And the Gemara now is going to question Rabbi Shammai's position. It's going to say, if indeed we are referring to the era when it is permitted to plow during the 2 pre-Sheviis periods, and even in this era it is forbidden to build steps, we would learn in the Mishnah, and it would say, basically the Mishnah would be saying the following. It would be saying, but he may build steps during Sheviis once the rains stopped because he's preparing them for the year following Sheviis. Basically what this is saying, Mishnah doesn't say that. It's basically saying it's forbidden to build these steps in the 6th year, even when there's no prohibition against plowing before Sheviis, and it must be that these steps are forbidden because people will suspect that he's intending to water the crops illegally during Sheviis. So if this were the case, the rabbis should similarly forbid somebody to build steps during Sheviis once the rains stop, because people would suspect him of intending to water crops on Sheviis. So since you have these rains and they're going to be filled up with water, and it would be filled up with water during Sheviis, and you just built these stone steps to get up to this ravine during Sheviis, people would certainly say that he's building these steps to take the water now. And in fact, the idea is that, he's really taking the water only in the following year. But if this were the case, that it would be a Marasain problem, he should be forbidden to take them, to build these steps even after the rains in the Sheviis year. And because if this is a Marasain problem, then the person would have access to this now, and he could just take the rainwater now during Sheviis. So the question is going to come up, that is if this is a forbidden and partially allowed because it's a told of plowing, and this is going to be the reason that it's forbidden on the 6th year. So why is it going to be permitted to build these steps during Sheviis after the rains have stopped? And the idea is that certainly it's forbidden to plow throughout all of Sheviis. So even if you're going to be preparing the field only for the 8th year, you're still not allowed to plow it. So basically, the question that's coming up is that why should building the steps, which is a told of plowing, be permitted if he's intending to use it for the 8th year? And this basically is why you can see that the Chazan Ish is holding that this is a Marasain issue. But again, the other issue is that if it's just a Marasain issue and it's not a plowing issue, then why are you allowing him to build it at all during the 6th year? Because he can, 7th year, because he can still get access to the water. So the Mara Fulda explains about this, that the answer, would appear to be that the act of building steps is considered a told of plowing only when they are built to water crops in the 7th year, and when they are built to water crops in the 8th year, or when they are built for some other purpose in construction, it is not considered a told of plowing at all. But this, by the way, is not a universal way of looking at it, and there's a lot of commentators who reject the Mara Fulda's approach. And this basically leaves a big question. So you have this really odd Mishnah here, and this is put here because this is odd. Are you allowing this to occur in the 7th year after the rains come? Because it's going to be where, hey, it's like plowing. You couldn't do this after the rains fell in the 6th year, but now you're getting this ready in the 7th year. Well, the issue, if it's going to be plowing, is that you can't plow at all in the 7th year anyway, even for 8th year crops. So why are you letting him build these steps? But if this is a Morris Ein problem, and you have this issue where you can't build the steps to this ravine with water in the 6th year, but you're going to allow it in the 7th year, then why is that a Morris Ein problem? Because he could just go and get water in the 7th year and use it to water his crops now in the 7th year. So which is it? If you're doing it and you're saying that this is because of a plowing issue, you have a problem. And if you're saying, oh, this is because of a Morris Ein problem, you still have a problem. Gemara is going to conclude this, and Rabbi Mana says what Rabbi Shammai said is correct regarding the first statement about the brisa, because the brisa is basically stating that it is permitted to plow during the 6th year, and evidently the brisa is forbidding someone to build steps only on account of the suspicion it generates. And if you ask that plowing during the 6th year should generate a suspicion that he intends to plant illegally on Sheviis, we would say like this. We would say that it is permitted to plow before Sheviis because people will say that he is preparing the field for the year after Sheviis. But it is forbidden to build these steps before Sheviis because people will say that he is preparing the steps for Sheviis. So the idea is that, says the Mara Fulda to help explain it, that people will not take his plowing as an indication that he's intending to plant during Sheviis because it is normal to plow many times before planting, and therefore people will assume that he's really just plowing an extra time and he's preparing the 8th year's planting. And the idea is that there's no advantage to building the steps earlier than they're needed, so that people will assume that he is building the steps for Sheviis because if he would need them only for the 8th year, then he would build them in the 8th year or at the end of the 7th year. So the Bryce is going to basically forbid somebody to build these steps even nowadays when it is permitted to plow throughout the 6th year. And the Gemara says that the Mishnah does not say like this. Rather, it states, but he may build these steps during Sheviis once the rains stop, because he is preparing them for the year following Sheviis. This is a very odd Mishnah. It's a very odd law because it really stands out because it doesn't quite fit within the category of Morris Ein, and it doesn't quite fit within the category of plowing. So the Mishnah is not forbidding someone to build the steps on account of the suspicion of others, because it would forbid step building on Sheviis. And it looks like the Mishnah is forbidding building steps after the rainy season in the 6th year, only because of a pre-Sheviis prohibition against plowing. And so the Mishnah is going to basically disagree with the Baraisa and hold that only in the era in which a pre-Sheviis prohibition was prohibited was it forbidden to build these steps before Sheviis. But nowadays, when it is permitted to plow before Sheviis, the Mishnah would also permit you to build the steps before Sheviis, which is what Rabbi Crispa and Rabbi Yochanan was saying. Now, the Rambam is going to basically agree with this conclusion, and he says this in Hilchos Shmita 3:10, who's saying that the prohibition against building steps in the 6th year does not apply nowadays, but apparently not with, the Rosh and the Mishnah. In other words, the Rosh and the Mishnah is holding that even today you can't do it. So it's very complicated, very unclear, and you have some of the greatest minds in the world both taking two different opinions. And, on one side, is it going to be because, it's going to be like what the Chazan Ish is saying, and basically, where like the Chazan Ish is saying that in his commentary on the Rambam's commentary on this, right, where the Chazan Ish is basically saying that Rambam could have understood that the conclusion, as we just explained it, and it doesn't basically saying that the prohibition against building steps in the 6th year does not apply nowadays, and basically saying that that he decided in accordance with the view of Rabbi Crispa, which the Gemara was starting with, and since Rabbi Crispa's opinion was stated as a halachic ruling, and the Gemara's conclusion was only stated in the course of a discussion, that perhaps that's why, it says the Chazan Ish, why the Rambam agrees with it. But again, the Chazan Ish is not holding that opinion. He's just trying to explain why the Rambam is holding that way. So there's a lot of questions as to this law because it's very peculiar. Now let's move on. The Mishnah stated that one may not support a dam with dirt, but he may make it a chayetz. And now the Gemara is going to ask the same question that you're asking right now. What is a chayetz? And the Gemara is going to answer. It's going to say something which interposes, and that's basically creating a loose partition. And as you say in the verse, it is building a chayetz. Now this verse, by the way, is in Ezekiel 13:10, and this is going to be comparing the false prophecies which gave people at the time an erroneous assurance of safety. And basically, these false prophets are basically like creating a wall which is inevitably going to fall down. And basically, this word chayetz is trying to show a partition that's made out of dirt or plaster, but is not permanent. So this is going to conclude, this is basically going to conclude Halacha 6, but I want to get more into the substance of this very unusual Gemara and very unusual sugya. Now, again, when you look at Rabbi Shammai, he's saying that, if the Mishnah is referring to a period when it is permitted to plow during the 2 pre-Sheviis periods, like before Rabban Gamliel lifted that, then basically we would learn that it is permitted to plow before Sheviis, but why would it also say it's forbidden to build the steps? And basically, the same reason is that it is forbidden to build the steps, and it should also be forbidden to plow. And just as building the steps in the end of the 6th year leads to suspicion that he's really going to try to, water illegally on Sheviis, so too plowing at the end of the 6th year would lead to the suspicion that he's going to try to, plant illegally on the Sheviis. So the question is, why is it permitted to plow at this time? And basically, you could read this as Rabbi Shammai asking, this other question as basically, saying why is the step building going to be allowed, but up until this date, but the plowing is going to be forbidden? And the Gemara really doesn't give a solution on this. And that's a really good point. In other words, that, it is forbidden to build the steps at a certain point, and it should also be forbidden to plow it's forbidden to plow in the in the 8th year, or 7th year. So if it's forbidden to plow in the 7th year as well, then why are you allowing him to build these steps? There's no answer in this. And, Rabbi Manna is saying that Rabbi Shammai is speaking correctly in this question about, building the steps and if that's going to be a told out plowing or not. But there's really another part. The second question in this is going to be where, if you're building these steps and it's not going to be allowed because of suspicion, then, you would see a distinction between plowing and building steps. And it is permitted to plow before Sheviis because ordinarily somebody who's plowing at this time is preparing a field for the year after Sheviis. And people are not going to be suspecting of planting, preparing the field for Sheviis. But it's forbidden to build these steps before Sheviis. Because ordinarily, somebody who's going to be building these steps is going to be preparing the steps for Sheviis. And basically, if you're building the steps for Sheviis, it's going to be a Marasayan issue where people are going to suspect you of trying to violate Sheviis. So Rabbi Mana is going to be arguing that the first question is correct and can't be answered. And, because, there's no way to, to get out of it. But, the Mishnah does not consider building steps told of plowing as forbidding it prior to Sheviis only on account of suspicion. In other words, that they're not letting you build it. They're not letting you build these steps in the 6th year because they're saying, well, you're gonna prepare this and use this in the 7th year for getting water. But again, the problem is that if it's just a Marasayan problem, then why are you're not allowed to plow during the 7th year at all? Why are you letting him take water in the 7th year? Because now he could theoretically just take the water and use it for his crops in the 7th year also, which is like plowing. So that it doesn't solve the Marasayan problem. And that's, I think, why this is a Mishnah by itself for this particular thing, and why the Gemara spend so much time on it, because this is just an unusual law without a lot of answers. And again, on one side of this debate, you have the Chazan Ish, who, by the way, is saying that, and on the other side, you have the Rosh and the Rosh, who don't agree with the Rambam. The Chazan Ish doesn't agree with the Rambam and says that the Rambam is only agreeing with Rabbi Crispa because he's saying that Rabbi Crispa's opinion was stated as a halachic ruling and the Gemara's conclusion was stated in the course of a discussion. So it's very unclear and it's very unusual, and that's why it gets its own treatment in the Mishnah, because it is so unusual. Have a great day.